Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another webinar that it's in the context of the medicine approaches course, but later you're going to watch it on YouTube as part of the LSLP session webinar series. And I am especially excited and delighted about today's webinar because our guest is someone who it's a very interesting story that someone whose work I started reading a long time ago when I was a doctoral student myself. And I was trying to learn to read, to understand all the work on new literacy studies. And I came across the work of one author, Dr. Bill Kist. And a few years later, I was lucky enough to actually get to know him in person and not only tell him about reading his work, but we have become great friends and colleagues. So I think the first lesson for everybody watching this webinar is if there is a particular scholar that you've read and whose work you respect and admire, reach out to those scholars and let them know, because that could later become an extended collaboration. Obviously, before we start with the conversation, I think, and I was having this conversation with Dr. Kist before the students showed up, that we want to take a moment to remember very fondly the memory of Professor Michelle Noble, one of the giants of the literacy research and the new literacy studies movement, who left us too soon last Friday. And I can honestly say it for people who knew her work and who knew who she was an inspiration on a scholarly level, and she was an inspiration at a personal level. And her legacy lives on in all of us who continue doing this kind of work, and she will be greatly, greatly missed. So with that, I'm going to now introduce formally our esteemed guest for today, Dr. Bill Kist. Dr. Kist has been doing research on classrooms and related to literacy for many, many years. Now he's an emeritus professor now at Kent State University, still doing some teaching, also enjoying his multiple pleasures and interest in music and art and museums, and of course being a family man as he is. So we're very excited to have you here to share some ideas with your students. The topic of today's conversation has to do with the notion of multimodality. And students in this class are familiarized with the notion of multimodality because I know they have read a few things in some of their curricular competence classes, but I think it's important to also help them in the idea of this conversation we're going to have today. And remember, for the students in the class, at any point you want to ask questions, or whether you want to turn the microphone on or you want to put them in the chat, you're welcome to do so. But I want to start the conversation, Bill, by asking the question, how do you understand the idea of multimodality?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Dr. Mora, for inviting me, and I do want to give a shout out to your professor's networking skills. He almost tackled me one year at AERA as I was coming into a session and identified himself, and it has really been a nice thing. And I really agree with what he just said to you, that I think especially in this age of social media, reach out to those people that you read and that have meant something to you, and I think they'll really get a kick out of it, because when you write for an academic audience, you really don't get you're not on the bestseller list. You don't you're not always sure exactly who's reading your work. So I really appreciate that he reached out to me, and we have been in touch now. I think it's probably about 8 or 9 years.
Somewhere around that, at least, yeah.
But I would answer the question that I got interested in multimodal texts because of my own interest in them. That's kind of a circular definition, but I was a musician, pianist from the age of 6, and was always really interested in music, movies, television. And in the United States, when it comes time to decide about being a teacher, if you're interested in music, there are really only two options. You can go the instrumental route and be a band director, or you can go the vocal route and be a choir director. Well, I only played the piano. I was not interested in being in the marching band. I'm guessing, I don't think you have anything quite similar to the concept of a marching band in Colombia. And I apologize that I'm not able to converse with you today in Spanish. I am bilingual, but my language, unfortunately, is French. I took all this French and never get a chance to use it. But I did not want to be a marching band director. I did not want to be a choir director. But I loved reading and writing. I always have been a big reader. So I thought, well, maybe I'll study to be an English teacher. And again, in the United States, when you're an English teacher, you end up teaching what's called the canon, the literary canon. And of course, the big name on that list, the first name is Shakespeare, who ironically wrote for the theater. But I was assigned to, okay, thank you, Jose. I was assigned to teach American Lit, but a lot of times British Lit. And so I had to start with Beowulf, the Canterbury Tales, and I taught kids who were 16, 17, 18 in an urban setting in Akron, Ohio, what we would call, I guess, a working class neighborhood, very diverse. And I soon noticed that when I would bring in music to play for my students, when I would show them a movie clip, when I would talk about my own experiences as a musician and relate it to the text we were reading, they really seemed to suddenly really get motivated and very interested in what I was doing. So I loved all that stuff. And in fact, I even found an old piano in the school that was not being used. And I asked my principal, is it okay if I move that piano into my classroom? And God bless him, even though I was an English teacher, I was not a music teacher. He said, sure, you can have that piano. So I brought the piano into my classroom and again, noticed that it really made a difference. If I would play the piano, I would play a song maybe when we were studying the romantic poets like Wordsworth or Shelley. I would have different lessons where I would play music, and I always had art hanging in my classroom, posters, art that the kids had drawn. And before I knew it, I was multimodal in my classroom. I didn't know I was multimodal because I didn't even know that word existed, but I was incorporating all these different kinds of modes of representation in my classroom. So I was a classroom teacher for 7 years, and then I was what we call a curriculum supervisor. I worked for a district in the office, helping teachers with textbooks and materials. And I decided that I wanted to go on for my Ph.D. Well, when you go on for your Ph.D., you need to come up with a research agenda. You need to do research. And I really was interested in this idea of multimodality. I didn't know that it was called that. And of course, right about that time too, the internet was coming in so that we could have all these multimodal texts. We were reading all of them on our computers. And that led more, I guess, urgency to this line of research. And I read the manifesto by the New London Group, that came out in 96. And that is what started giving me a name for what I was interested in. And that name was multimodal. I don't know if they used the term, I think, new literacies. But I started looking into that and meeting some of these people, like Dr. Mora just mentioned, like Michelle Noble. Alan Luke was one of the first people I met in person, and he was very kind. He and his co-editor, John Elkins, published 2 of my articles in JAWL in the early 2000s. And then my specialty has been capturing, I really see myself almost as a documentarian, someone who captures what real teachers are doing. And that was my dissertation, and that became my first book, New Literacies in Action, where I captured 6 teachers from all over North America. 3 were from Canada and 3 were from the United States, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Cleveland. And I portrayed what they were doing with multimodal texts. And, some were doing well, some were struggling, but that's always been my research agenda, has been trying to see how we are breaking down that hierarchy of modality, because we have tended to put words on a page, a book, as the highest form of communication. And I think what multimodality, multimodal literacies does is it says, we don't have to have that hierarchy. There are certain times when it's better for us to communicate, maybe using an email or using emoticons. Let's have a conversation with our students about all the different multimodal texts they both read and produce. So there's an answer. I hope that's not too long-winded.
No, on the contrary, I like, and I want to highlight some of the things from the answer. I think one very important thing, I think that's a good lesson for the teachers and for some of the younger scholars who may be watching this video later, is sometimes we are doing things in our classrooms and we don't know that, as you said, if you were doing multimodality, even if you didn't know the word existed. And it's always important to point out that one of the things that sometimes happens to us when we go to grad school or when we go for our PhDs is not that we start doing things, but that we discover what we were doing is actually called, or that there is a theory, or that there is a school of thought, or that there are certain articles that explain what we're doing, and they start giving it a name. So I think that's an important thing, that a lot of our research agendas don't come out of nowhere. A lot of times they come from our own working classroom. So that's why the classroom experience is so important. A lot of the things that we turn into research later are the result of what we lived as teachers. So I think that's a very important thing to point out right there. I would say the second one, I think it's the very idea, as you pointed out, that there is no such thing as a hierarchy of text, a hierarchy of textual forms or modes or resources. And I think that's one of the things that multimodality and multimodal literacies and multimodal theory wants to highlight. Like, yes, we still need the word. We still need the written word, and we still need the spoken word. But we also have all these other forms of expression, and that no one form of expression either operates by itself or is inherently better or superior to the others.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're, I don't know, if you're trying to give someone directions on how to, I don't know, conjugate a verb, you probably do want to use words. Or if you're in the medical field and you need to write a description of, I don't know, what a liver does or what a pancreas does, You probably do need to use words. But if you're talking about falling in love, are words always the best way of talking about what it means to fall in love or to experience loss? And also, I think, in the United States, and I don't know if it's this way in Colombia, but the field of English only dates back to about 1910 and the early 20th century. And it really came out of speech, rhetoric, which of course is our most ancient discipline, actually. But unfortunately, in the 20th century, in the United States, the field of English became very hung up on words and what we term standard English. So and still to this day in this country, if you're at a party or in a social event and you tell people I'm an English teacher, a lot of times they'll say, "Oh, I better watch my grammar. I hope I didn't make a mistake with my grammar." And I think that what, new literacies and multimodal literacies has done is kind of get us out of that stereotype of the English teacher, and I'm sure it's true with Spanish too, being hung up on standard English or standard Spanish, and saying, sometimes it's appropriate to use slang. Sometimes it's appropriate to use emoticons. Sometimes it's appropriate to use abbreviations. We shouldn't, I think, as English teachers and Spanish teachers, I don't think we should be hung up on that. We should be rather more hung up on almost situational, language, talking about. And of course, if you go back to James G. and discourse, I mean, thinking in, okay, what is the appropriate discourse? I'm speaking to you today, in my professorial tone. I try to make it approachable. That's something I've actually tried to do, and some people have faulted me for that in my writing. I don't care whether they have or not, because I like to write the way I want to write. I've been able to write academically enough to get published in academic settings. So I realize that there is a discourse, and I do follow it to some extent. But I just want to emphasize that I hope that maybe in your classrooms, you'll have conversations with your kids about the way they speak to you, the way they speak to their parents, the way they speak to their friends versus, and whether there's a difference in those discourses. I'm sure there is. And how they speak when they're texting. This research is already, I think about 5, 6, 7 years old, but there was one piece of research that came out of the Pew Educational Trust, which said that there are some kids, particularly females, it tends to be, at least in the United States, who are sending like 100 texts per day. I mean, this is their main route of communication. So shouldn't we as teachers be having conversations about, what do you say in these texts? How do you put together sentences? Do you even put together sentences when you're texting your friend? And how is that different from when you're applying for a job? So these are the types of things that I think we should be emphasizing. And unfortunately, in the United States, what has been emphasized a lot of times in English classes is how many syllables are there in a Shakespearean sonnet, and while that's interesting, is that really what we should be focusing on with our kids? And Jose's saying he doesn't think 100 is that much. So see, that's why I said that research is a little bit out of date. So what do you all think? I mean, do you all text a lot? do you ever have these conversations with your teachers or professors? About do any of your teachers or professors get bent out of shape or angry when they see an emoticon or non-standard Spanish or English?
Folks, any thoughts about that? Let's give the students a second or two to answer.
Yeah, actually, when I was in school, I like to think that my professors and my teachers were actually, I mean, my Spanish teachers were good because they wouldn't mind that. They thought that it was another way of communicating multimodality, even if they didn't know how to call it. So in that sense, I'm glad that I had those kind of teachers.
That's great, Jose. In Colombia, who are the equivalents to Shakespeare? I mean, I'm thinking, do you read Cervantes?
Yeah, probably that would be the one.
Cervantes?
Yeah, definitely.
Are there other Spanish authors, Marquez or Gabriel?
Well, Garcia Marquez is far more contemporary. I mean, it's become canonical, but it's more contemporary.
Who are some of the other? I'm just curious. Who are some of the other authors that you read in your literature classes growing up?
Well, we used to. I mean, when I was in high school, that was a long time ago. We used to adore. I mean, it was a lot of the classics, like 15th, 16th century. And even I remember when I was in college and I was taking my American and British lit courses. It was very canonical. Very canonical, very traditional. I mean, stuck to I'm kind of thinking Harold Bloom here, the canon, and that kind of text. We hardly ever read multicultural texts. We didn't have that in the 1990s in school. We didn't have that. Let's say that push that we have now for the multicultural literature that's happening more often now. I think it's a nice turn of events.
Well, we've come a long way in the United States when we're talking about the printed word in opening up our canon to include more diversity. But I would like us to go further in the area of multimodal, because it's I think sometimes, like when I've been doing my research and I ask a teacher, could I come in and see something that you're doing related that includes multimodal? Sometimes they'll say, oh yeah, come in April, because that's when I do my Van Gogh unit. And it's like, no, I'm looking for teachers that are doing this constantly, that it's not just an add-on. It's not just an extra thing that you do at the end of the year. I just think the way we read and write, I mean, look at what we're doing now. I would not be able to be a guest speaker in Dr. Mora's class before, these online meeting, whether we're using Zoom or Teams or, Google. There's so much we can do now. We're communicating in these different ways every day of our lives. But then we go into our classrooms and the teacher says, okay, open your books to page 46. Let's start reading aloud. And I just think there's such a disconnect between what we see in school literacy and what the kids are experiencing their literacies outside.
Yeah, and I think that's has been the key element, and I think that's the reason why we need to we have this conversation about multimodality and what it is and what it looks like and how that changes the class. I think because I think that's the whole point, that we have these generations of, and I'm thinking about the teachers we have right now, who are more interconnected than ever. Who are more involved with multiple textual forms of creation. Because in fact, we can do the exercise of how much writing and how much text creation is happening right now in our lives. And I would like to ask the students to start thinking about, and you can use the chat for this, you can start thinking about all the different kinds of text creation that you do in one day. And if you can start making a list in the chat and think about what kinds of texts do you create in one day? Can we start doing some brainstorming, folks? And can we put it in the chat? Because I mean, we already started with one, texting, like once you do instant messaging or like WhatsApp or Telegram or that. Can we think of others, everybody? I'm monitoring the chat, waiting for them to share some ideas.
Professor, I kind of got lost. What was the question again?
Yeah, the question is, once again, is think about all the kinds of text creation events that you participate in during one day. Like, what kind of text do you create during one day? That's the question. Yeah, for example, comments in Instagram posts. That's one. Can we think of another one? Anybody? WhatsApp conversations, says Susanna. Harold says retweets. Very good. Sharing memes. Very good. Let's see what else we got. So look at what we have already. Sending stickers and emotes. Okay, there you go. We'll continue, but that will be the point. The point here is, and I think that's what that next part I would like to continue the conversation with Dr. Kist is, why are these things not coming from what we have seen in your experience as a researcher working with in schools? Why are these things not coming to our classes? Why is this not happening?
Are you asking me to give my opinion?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I think part of it is that teaching, especially if you're going to be a language teacher, I mean, well, let's just look at all the subjects that you can teach. It tends to attract people who love their hold on, my phone's going off here, so I'm gonna interrupt. I'm gonna turn off that text from my life right now. But I think teaching tends, especially when we're talking about the upper grades, people who want to teach teenagers, tends to attract people who love their subject. And that's understandable. They love Shakespeare. They love Cervantes. They love, or if they're going to teach science, they love biology. They love, history. They go into it because they then want to kind of impart that to the next generation. The problem with that is that if we're in a comprehensive high school, which we still, have in the United States, you're going to be teaching all the kids, whether or not they like Shakespeare or Cervantes, it's irrelevant. And your job is really not to teach them, make them love Shakespeare or Cervantes. I believe your job is to get them to love the language, to be able to be conscious users of the language. And if you're just going to stand up there and make them memorize a soliloquy from Hamlet, it's nice. I mean, it's pleasant, Not for most of your students, however, it's not pleasant.
Mhm.
It might be for you, but I just think that that's part of the reason why. So like all the things that you just listed in the chat, sharing emoticons, sharing memes, a more conservative English or Spanish teacher is going to look at that and say, that's just trash. That's garbage. That's so low on the hierarchy of simple systems. It's not even worth talking about. Well, of course, I beg to differ, and that's why I've spent 20 years of my career on this. I think it's fascinating and worth talking about with kids. They need to have that conversation.
Absolutely. And it's like, and I think and I think it's really important to bring that conversation to the front and have this with these young teachers right here, in the sense of kind of like, yes, we may love our subject, but shouldn't we also think about that, how we get students engaged with the subject? And I think that's what when you start thinking of multimodal literacies, that's what it can do. It can get your students engaged with, we can get engaged with the different kinds of texts, and can get engaged with a more, I'd say, even a more interactive sense of classroom teaching, classroom instruction.
Yeah, I think that, my gateway into this was heavily related to motivation, both my own motivation to be interested in what I was doing. And I've written about this many times, but one of the things that I did, and I won't go into the whole long story of why I did it, but I showed them this was my ninth graders in an urban Midwest setting. I showed them Charlie Chaplin's The Kid, which is a 40-minute silent film from 1921. Now, Charlie Chaplin was a silent film star who was, they said at one time, probably the most famous person in the entire world, so I think in Colombia, they were watching Charlie Chaplin. In Europe, they were watching Charlie Chaplin. But I showed that in my ninth grade English class, and I looked around, and those kids who had never seen a silent film before were completely transfixed by the story, which is about Charlie Chaplin adopting an orphan. And then he's worried that the authorities are gonna come back and take the orphan away from him. And I looked around the room, and the kids were just completely glued to the screen. And so I agree with what Dr. Moore is saying, that I think, that motivation, that engagement piece is what got a lot of us interested in multimodal literacies. But I think it goes far beyond motivation. It's just, I think now it's a life skill. I was watching something on, I guess it was an episode of Saturday Night Live, because Saturday Night Live is a variety show here in the United States that's pretty famous. And they were doing a skit about the Squid Game. The Squid Game. And I asked my wife, I said, have you ever heard of the Squid Game? She had heard of it a couple times. So I did a quick search on it. It's a Netflix series from, I think it's Korea.
South Korea, yeah.
South Korea, and it's sweeping the globe. Now, I think that's another thing. I mean, I'm coming to you today from Ohio in the United States. I was so excited. I told my kids today, hey, I'm going to be a speaker at a class in Columbia. And people, I think this is another thing that technology gets badmouthed for. Technology's dumbing us down. It's making us idiots. But if you look at, I think the top 10 series on Netflix, a lot of them are international. They're from Korea. They're from Europe. They're from Mexico. Maybe there's one from Colombia on there. But I've always been very positive about the new literacies, the multimodalities, not only from an engagement standpoint, but from global literacies. I wrote a book on that topic. I just think there are a lot of advantages, and I think it's sad that it doesn't seem to really be creeping into the typical daily classroom. Maybe you guys will do it for us, put us into that new era. I hope you will.
I hope so too, and I feel optimistic as well. But now here's another question. So right now we have in the audience, all these are very young students getting ready to start the class. They have heard about multimodality, but I think but sometimes the big question is the big question sometimes we ask ourselves is, where do I start, or how do I start? Because how do I start? I think that would be the big question. How do I start making that or getting into that multimodal style of teaching, or that into the multimodal practices? So I would like to, again, from your experience in all the research you've done in the classrooms, what would be the best way for young teachers to get immersed into this multimodal way of carrying out the classroom?
Well, I always say that it's you don't have to have a lot of technology in order to do this. So if you're using that as an excuse, and again, I don't know the level of technology, or do most schools that you'll be going into have internet and Wi-Fi?
Some of them will, but it's a mixed bag. It's gonna be a very mixed bag.
I think that even if so worst case scenario, let's say you're teaching in a school that has no internet. I still think you can bring in pictures, you can bring in posters, you can bring in music, you can play a CD. I think one of the simplest things you can do is that when you're reading, a short story or a novel from your textbook, just throw in some multimodal references. Oh, this reminds me of a song, or this reminds me of a painting. If you are lucky enough to teach in a school that has Wi-Fi and the internet, and YouTube is not blocked. I don't know how much blocking you have. The United States is a very puritanical country, so we have a lot of districts have blocked websites. But if you are lucky enough to teach in a school that has the internet, you could show a quick YouTube clip. I sure wish that I had YouTube when I was a teacher. I actually had to bring in VHS and
oh boy.
Show them on my VCR. But I think it's just one of the easiest, simplest things you can do is just be a consumer of pop culture yourself. I know Dr. Mora is, because I'm friends with him on Facebook, and I see, all the cool things that he reads and watches on TV. It makes me sad when I do a presentation to teachers and they'll tell me I don't own a TV, or I never watch TV. See, I think when you're teaching teenagers, I don't think that's good. Or they'll tell me I don't listen to any music that was made after the 1960s, or I never listened to hip hop. I think that's one of the simplest things that you can do is just immerse yourself just in pop culture and see that a lot of these classic texts, of course, the reason we still teach Shakespeare is because he is so relevant. I mean, I hope you don't think that I'm bashing the canonicals, because when you look at Cervantes or Shakespeare, they're still read, or Dickens, they're still read because they are relevant. It's just that the language a lot of times is a barrier. So if you can immerse yourself in texts that you see, just anybody sees, okay, yeah, but it's okay if they don't watch TV. But I mean, it's great, Jose, that you're bringing up YouTube and stuff like that. I have teachers that, I was in a professional setting last week and we were discussing social media, and there was a guy there that he works in technology and he didn't know what TikTok was. So I just think if you're gonna be working with teenagers, you really need to keep up. And that's great, Jose, that you mentioned a couple things that you think that kids are watching. JD has her or his name up.
Natalia, Natalia, go for it.
Okay, so first of all, good afternoon. So I wanted to mention that sometimes it feels like that schools have this, like, it's always this belief that the youth is rebel, or that the youth is, that the things that the youth likes are not the appropriate things for schools. And recently in class, one of the teachers mentioned that Socrates, when books came out, he was like, oh no, conversation is over. Conversation is over. No, with these books, you're not gonna learn anything. So I was completely surprised, because now they say like, oh, you should read more. Books are the best for learning. And now the bad thing are the cell phones and these technological devices. So it seems like the story is repeating again. Everything, something new comes out, is we feel that is a threat for education. We feel that that is a distraction, that it is not useful. And I think that one of the important things in multimodality is also using these things, like the current things, the things that youth likes, like including those things. And I want to share like a story, because okay, I mean like last semester, but this class is like, so I waited to pick this class because I wanted to see this class with Dr. Berry, because I really like this K-pop group, BTS. And my classmates told me like, oh my God, the teacher mentioned BTS in one of the classes, like, oh my God. So I literally, just because of that, I waited like 2 semesters to pick this class, because I wanted it to be available with Dr. Berry. So, like those little things that the teachers mention, sometimes multimodality isn't even like visual, it's just words, like the descriptive things and things like that. When a teacher mentions something that caught your attention, so I think it's important to include the things our students like in class, or and maybe also introducing things that they don't know yet, but they will probably like.
Yes, so you see that, Dr. I should refer to you as Dr. Barry, right? Sorry about that. But because he mentioned BTS, Natalia signed up for this class. So good for you, Dr. Barry. Yes, I mean, Natalia, you're bringing up a very, very good point, that this is a very old story, even going back to, the invention of the printing press. I mean, I have a couple quotes where people were saying that reading would cause health problems. I mean, every time we've had a new type of modality, there have been people that who have felt that this is the end of civilization. You're in the 20th century, it was comic books or graphic novels. People thought that comic books were horrible and ruining children. So you're absolutely right. I think, every time, I'm in a setting where you have grown-ups saying, oh, these kids won't get their faces out of their phones. I just have to kind of roll my eyes, because, we just, to use a phrase that we have in the United States, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are too many people who just want to ban phones, ban tablets, ban the internet from our classrooms. And of course, there are times when we want our kids to focus and maybe put away their phones, but that doesn't mean that we ban them. And as you're pointing out, Natalia, unfortunately, we have a long history of, and I suppose that's just human nature. We tend to be nervous about new things and worried that the new is going to supplant and get rid of the things we love about the old. But I think we're doing our students a disservice. Now, I have to say, Dr. Berry, I'm going to have to go in about 5 minutes. So
no problem with that. And then we can start kind of wrapping it up. I just want to, because we can start wrapping it up. And I think we got a lot of good ideas from this session. I think some of the takeaways, first of all, is don't think of multimodality just as technology oriented. That there is, as you pointed out, there is a lot of stuff we can do in the class that is multimodal, and it doesn't necessarily mean you have to use technological with high-tech devices. That there is a lot of them, even in the sense of the multimodal discourse itself. It's how you connected the discourse in the class to everyday lives, to what's happening, to current events, to TV, to pop culture. That in and of itself is a form of multimodal text. So I think that will be the first lesson. The second big takeaway, I would say, is not to be afraid to do this. That actually getting, as you get more and more into the multimodal discourse, what's going to happen is your students are going to be more engaged. The students are going to be more interested in that kind of work. So I think this was a good session in that sense, that we gave people some food for thought in terms of what multimodal discourse is and what multimodal discourse looks like. We can just kind of wrap it up. And once again, Dr. Kist, my gratitude, and I think for your time and the generosity and for the insights that you provided for the students in the class, and once again, people watching this video later, about what it means to do and think and be multimodal.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate, Natalia, your comment here in the chat. And let me give you my email address. I have a very simple one, an easy one. If you have any questions about this, or you just want to pick my brain some more, I would welcome an email. My address is wkist@kent, KENT.edu. Yeah, I guess I could have just put it in the chat. See, see, I'm not using my my technical skills here. But please email me, and you're lucky that you have a professor such as Dr. Berry, which Natalia just alluded to, that it's, for whatever reason, I think there are a lot of professors that are resistant or nervous about this. And I just would encourage you to, there's so many examples of teachers and professors that are doing these types of activities, even in very low tech, high poverty situations. So I'd encourage you to look for those examples, look for some of the things that I've written, and good luck to you with your careers. And I hope we can stay in touch.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much. And once again, for everybody watching this on YouTube, I remind you that this is part of the LSLP in Session webinar series on our YouTube channel. We invite you to enjoy this one and watch all the other great webinars that we have related to things, all things literacy and qualitative inquiry. So with that, thank you so much, and everybody have a very, very good afternoon.